for coming out. Actually, really impressive turnout towards the end of the semester, so thank you. So this is our final, the culminating event for the Lampert Institute Speaker Series on Food for this year. And actually, I can't think of a better culminating event. We're really pleased to have 3 Colgate alums here to speak today on the broad theme of understanding urban food issues, sources, policies, and ways forward. So in terms of format for today, so each of our speakers will present for about 10 minutes, drawing on their own backgrounds and experiences with various organizations. So hopefully they'll each bring a unique perspective to our broad theme. We'll then have about 10 minutes where our panelists will elaborate further on their comments in light of each other's presentations. And then after that, we'll open up the floor for broader discussions with questions from the audience. So I'd like to begin by just saying a few words about each of our 3 speakers. So on my right, your left, it's Courtney Ahern. And Courtney's motivation springs from the belief that everyone deserves access to good food. Courtney currently works at Feeding America, the nation's largest domestic hunger relief organization, and also serves as the Midwest Regional Governor of Slow Food USA, promoting good, clean, and fair food. She's worked across the food chain and across sectors, tackling complex issues including food insecurity, climate change, food system biodiversity, and international agricultural development. Courtney has contributed to publications and panels with National Geographic, Food Tank, the Food Think Tank, the Christian Science Monitor, and Farm Aid. And Courtney's appetite and curiosity have guided her from her home state of Minnesota to apprenticing on a family farm in New York, to catching red ants in the jungles of northeastern Thailand. Fun. Courtney would do anything for one more, oh no, that's going to be tough, Xiaolong Bao from Yang's in Shanghai. I can't say I've had the pleasure, but they sound good. And she always stockpiles extra butter in her freezer. Always good practice. And next we have Jen Rusciano. And Jen is I've never heard this term before. Michigander?
Michigander.
I wanted to say that, and I wasn't sure.
Michigander.
Yeah. Learning. So she's a Michigander, and calls Detroit home. So she earned her BA from Colgate in geography, class of 2010, and in 2010 she received a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship to explore the social, economic, and environmental impact of chocolate production on cacao farming communities around the world. Inspired to link young people with farmers close to home, she completed 2 terms with the National Service Program Food Corps, connecting cafeterias and classrooms in need of nourishment with local food from Michigan farmers in school gardens. Seeing the need to engage students beyond the school year, Jen co-founded the Detroit Food Academy, bringing food, business, and learning together. Detroit Food Academy is a nonprofit that works with local educators, chefs, and business owners to inspire young Detroiters through entrepreneurial experiences rooted in food. Experiences which open doors, create connections, and spark confidence. She has served as executive director for 4 years, supporting the organization from vision to action, working with an amazing team to build the kind of place students and staff want to work in. And then finally, to your right, my immediate left, Mark Van Topel. So Mark began his professional career in the nonprofit environmental field, working for organizations such as Greenpeace and Rainforest Action Network before entering the professional kitchen. A little bit of a switch there. Mark has worked in 2 5-star restaurants, graduated first in his class from the Culinary Institute of America, and has had the honor to prepare dinner for 2 U.S. presidents. Seeking to combine his passions for social justice and food, Mark received his master's in food policy from NYU and worked with a private program evaluation company before joining New York City's Human Resources Administration, the country's largest social services administration, as the Deputy Director of Policy and Procedure. He then worked with the District of Columbia's Department of Human Services on issues of homelessness and food security before leaving the public sector to become the Director of Marketing and Operations for an all-local grocery store in Washington, D.C. So maybe we'll first welcome our speakers. And I guess we'll start with Courtney.
Great. Can you guys hear me okay? In the back? Yeah? Cool. So I'm Courtney, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here, to the Lampert Institute, to Professor K-Wall, and to all of you for coming. This is really exciting. I think in our conversations today, we've all echoed that these conversations were not necessarily as present on campus when we were here years ago. So it's really cool to be invited and then to see that this many people are interested. So thank you. This is just a little bit more about me. So I sort of came into this space with a passion for social justice and an avid eater. I've loved food my whole life. As you can see, that's a xiaolongbao, which are these amazing dumplings in Shanghai that are full of like hot soup and pork, and they're fried and they're amazing. So I was always someone who really cared about eating and really cared about social justice, and was able to connect the two while I was at Colgate, in large part thanks to Professor Henke and his food class, and then have kind of worked for a variety of different food and agriculture nonprofits since. But what I want to talk about today, since we're talking about urban food issues and ways forward, I currently work for Feeding America, which is the largest domestic hunger relief organization. So I really want to talk about hunger as kind of my food issue for the day, and spend some time talking about what we mean when we say that, and giving some definitions and really kind of a broad national perspective about what's the picture of food insecurity in America today. Actually, on my way here, I came through New York City and had a cab ride with an Egyptian cab driver, and he asked me what I did, and I told him, and he laughed at me because, not at me, but at the idea that there could be hungry Americans. And what does that mean? How can that be true? How could he come from a place like Egypt and come to America? I mean, he just couldn't believe it, and I think that's true for a lot of people. So when we talk about food insecurity, really what we mean is a lack of access at times to enough food for an active, healthy life for all members of the household. So that's the USDA's definition of food insecurity. And when you take that definition into consideration, there are 48 million people in America right now that are facing food insecurity, or struggling with hunger. That includes 15 million children and 5.4 million seniors. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. And I think a couple important things to note about that is, when we talk about struggling, not knowing where your next meal comes from, that's uncertainty. And it doesn't have to be temporary, or it doesn't have to be permanent, excuse me. I think a lot of people assume that if you're hungry, you're homeless. And that's not true. This food insecurity is a cycle for a lot of people. So you might move in and out of food insecurity a number of times throughout a year because of, someone in your family gets sick, someone has an unexpected injury, job loss. There's all these reasons why people kind of go into and out of food insecurity. But I think it's important to think about what the face of that looks like and understand that it's much broader and more diverse than maybe what we are taught. So if that's what food insecurity is, why is it important? Why should you care? Why should I care? And I think in the context of our conversation today, especially in urban food insecurity or urban food issues, that implies a sense of community and a sense of place. And it really affects everyone. So, when you think about kids who aren't getting breakfast before they go to school, that's obviously impacting their ability to learn and to make their way through school. For those of us who aren't students and are in the workforce, it can affect our performance, our emotional, physical, mental health, huge tie-ins there. And I'll just say, too, that this is really a kind of emerging area of focus, certainly for Feeding America, and I think for a lot of people who work in the hunger space, that it's not just about food, right? It's about how food insecurity connects with these other issues of the people that we're serving and the clients that we're serving. So chances are, if someone's struggling with food insecurity, they might also be struggling with housing or health or other areas of their life, and so we kind of think of food as part of this connected web. So now I'm going to get a little bit into the numbers. In order for us to really understand kind of the issue of hunger, we kind of need to know the scope of the problem, right? So who's being impacted? How do we know how many people? How did we get that 48 million number? So every year, Feeding America published a study called Map the Meal Gap, and it's really cool. I encourage all of you to go to Map the Meal Gap on our website. It's an interactive map. Anyone can type in their zip code, and you get real-time food insecurity data of your county by county level. So this is kind of the overall picture. I also some highlights from the most recent version of the study is hunger exists in every single county in the nation. And I think that's really important to think about, that it's not just over there, right? It's right here. The average county level food insecurity rate is around 15%, so 15% of residents are struggling with hunger at some time in that year. And then we also, I'm not going to get into this as much today, but if you're interested, I'm happy to talk more, but we actually go into kind of like the cost per person to get a meal in each of these places, because it's obviously going to look different in New York City than it is in Madison County, right? So, speaking of urban food issues, this is the list of counties with the highest number of people. So not necessarily the highest rates, but the highest number. So where are the most people who are food insecure by county? And you can see it's a pretty urban list, right? We've got Los Angeles, we've got New York, Chicago, where I'm from, number 3. These are all pretty much big cities. But, you know, while we think of hunger as a particularly urban problem, if you look at the rates of food insecurity, it's actually kind of surprising to note that rural communities are actually more likely to have the highest rates of food insecurity. So this chart shows the places that have the highest risk in the country, and then breaks that down between urban, suburban, and rural, and you'll see that over half of those are rural. So that's kind of surprising. You can see, and then if you really look at children, child hunger is kind of a subset of the work that Feeding America does, and certainly a separate set of interventions and programs for kids. 62% of the highest food insecurity rates for children are actually rural as well. So just kind of something for us to consider as we're talking about today, and as we think about what our assumptions are about who is facing hunger. Just for your reference, this is actually Madison County. If you go to Map the Meal Gap and type in our county here, you can see there are over 8,500 people right here in Madison County who are facing food insecurity. That's about 12% of the population. So I think that's easy to forget about when you're on campus, right? There's actually a food cupboard right in town, the Hamilton Food Cupboard. I had the honor of volunteering there when I was a student, and I encourage you all to as well. But actually the Hamilton Food Cupboard's website says that they serve 200 families every month. So that's a lot of people who just need some extra help, right? So how does Feeding America fit into all of this? I just want to talk a little bit about the work that we do there. Feeding America is a national network. So we're actually based in Chicago. We have one national office, and then we work with 200 food banks around the country. So I'm sure in a lot of the hometowns where you're from, you have a local food bank. Maybe your family's volunteered or donated, or donated turkeys on Thanksgiving or something like that. Each of those food banks has a network of food pantries and soup kitchens. So those are the place, if you think about a person who's actually going and seeking assistance, that's probably where they're going. That's kind of the first line of defense, and those might be in churches or schools. There's 60,000 of them around the country. So this is a really big network, and all together, all of us serve 46 million people every year. Feeding America's vision is really a hunger-free America. What does that look like? What does that look like in the context of other issues like health and housing? So we, kind of want to feed America's hungry. We kind of push a lot of food out into the system, but we also want to engage the country in the fight to end hunger. So that looks like advocacy. That's raising awareness of the issue. That's partnering with other organizations that do complementary work. And I just wanted to make a plug here at the end for how you can get involved. I would say advocacy is so, so, so important. It's something that was on my mind a little bit when I was at Colgate, and I think now that I'm sort of out in the world, kind of recognizing the power that you have to affect these issues just as a citizen. So we have a pretty robust advocacy program at Feeding America where people call their senators and get engaged on issues, things like the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act or the Farm Bill or SNAP. SNAP is the National Food Stamp Program, formerly called Food Stamps. It's shown to be just an incredibly effective economic program and safety net. We, while we're feeding people through our network, we also try to get as many people as possible kind of signed up for SNAP. And this program's really kind of come under attack and is a popular talking point in debates. You might hear it certainly at Republican debates. So you can see my bias, but I think it's really a bipartisan issue and has been proven to have kind of incredible economic value. And for something like for every $1 of SNAP given to a person, it generates $9 of local economic activity when spent in the community, which I think everyone could get behind. So I'm going to stop there and looking forward to everyone else's thoughts.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. Let's see. My name is Jen. I'm trying to see if I can get the timer to work so I don't go over time. Will that go? Okay, cool. Hi. That was amazing, Courtney. Thank you for setting the stage. And I am coming from a much more kind of narrow experience rooted in the community of Detroit and working with young people at our organization, the Detroit Food Academy. And I think if maybe the broad context word could be access around hunger, maybe my framing word would be participation and engagement. So you got a little bit of what DFA does before, and I'll just let you know we're a youth leadership program for Detroit high school students. All you'll see up here are photos of our students, so I just wanted you to get a sense of what we do. But we use the medium of food business, food-based projects to engage young people in really putting their vision out into the world for what they want to see change in our city and our community in Detroit. Food's an amazing way to do that. A lot of our students create businesses, they intern with chefs, all kinds of things. And food, I think, as probably many of you might feel as well, it's this exciting way to talk about not only some of the biggest problems that we face today in our country when we're talking around things like access or racism, it's also offering up some of the most hopeful solutions, I think, for building some really beautiful things, both in a large scale in terms of global conversations, in terms of rural-urban divides, but also hyper-locally when we're talking about how do you tangibly put something into the world that makes an impact, from farmers markets to small businesses. Some of the root causes of food insecurity that I just wanted to talk about that I feel like I've engaged with a bit. There seem to be very large systems that reproduce economic insecurity that ensure that folks maybe are not having access monetarily to good, healthy, nourishing food, and some divestment from grocery stores in places like Detroit. So I don't know if anyone's heard the term food desert before. Many people, I'm sure, in this room. So it's a term that Detroit is often spoken about in that context. It's not an accurate term in the city. There are grocery stores. They're not chains. There was removal of chains from the stores, which creates a bit of an access issue. But I've heard other people use the term food swamp. I don't know if that's come up for anyone else, which I think is sort of interesting. It's like wading through all of these crappy options that are prevalent but not nourishing. So the corner store may be right at hand and has chips, but is that really giving you what you need? So in addition to some of these physical access barriers, there's also been quite a bit of internalized damage that I think communities like Detroit hold around food and around identity and around feeling like they are not, that like our city is not important enough to be receiving attention for some of the issues that folks are facing day in and day out. I imagine some folks have heard about the urban agriculture movement in the city of Detroit, given that we have a great deal of physical space, and that some of the pullout of larger companies has left room in the city, not only for urban agriculture and the starting of many farms, but also for new businesses to be stepping in, small businesses that are providing services that are meeting the needs of people in the community. This is something that I think is pretty exciting about Detroit. Detroiters have had to care for their own needs for a really long time. And it's an interesting start when we begin to talk about how economic models can be used to actually change the way not only that we access food, but the way that we all live, that we work, what our neighborhoods look like. So to bring that a little bit back, that kind of engagement can begin at a very young age. And in my work after the Watson Fellowship, where I was working with Food Corps, which is a national service organization, we were getting really amazing food from local farmers on the lines at cafeterias, and we were seeing trays and trays of it being thrown away because the students that we were engaging with had never interacted with these foods before. These were a sort of conventional definition of wellness, brown rice, butternut squash, things like that, that were being shoved in front of students' faces, and they were saying, whoa, this makes no sense to me, I didn't have a say in this, does not represent my identity. And so it became a really interesting question of how do you engage young people in actually participating in making food choices and shaping the food community that's around them. I think maybe many of you have had the experience, I don't know, of having a parent put like vegetables on your plate and going, ew, or being invited to maybe help cook something and feeling a sense of pride or participation that makes you a bit more open to trying something different. So what we do is engage Detroit high school students in a process where we're asking them what they think needs to change in our city. What do they want to see happen? If we put resources in your hands, what do you want to build? And food has naturally emerged amongst our students as a way to do that. So oftentimes our students are creating a business or they're interning with a chef. This is one of the businesses, the Detroit Pop Shop. We also have another one that was in there somewhere, Mitten Bites. And these are opportunities for high school students to make things that are very cool. Food's awesome. Everyone watches Iron Chef. It's like the hip thing. But also, it's a really amazing opportunity for someone to say to a young Detroiter that your vision is important in this city, that you should have a say, that you should be able to put it out there into the world and see people respond to it. So in a very simple nutshell, what we do is we run after-school programming in 10 high schools around the city. Students join it just like a normal club, and every day we cook together, we eat, we have a budget that our students manage, we plan field trips, we plan workshops, we build a business from the ground up, and then in the summertime we launch it at farmers markets around the city of Detroit, including Eastern Market, which for those who've been in the area, it's the oldest, largest public market in the country, and it's a really amazing asset that the city has. We also shepherd students' ideas when they're interested in taking it to the next level. So the two businesses you saw are student businesses that have gone on into grocery stores, Whole Foods and a few other chains where you can find them in the region. And we also are constantly working with food businesses in the city to create a sense of community between young people and people who are starting restaurants or starting businesses. There is a concerted effort in places like Detroit to import talent, and there's not so much of a focus on cultivating the young people who live there already. And not least of all because of physical transportation isolation. Detroit does not have a very well-functioning mass transit system. Our students may never meet somebody who could be a mentor to them. They may never meet someone who may know exactly who to put them in touch with if they want to be a pastry chef or if they just want to learn about marketing. Maybe some of you had the experience in high school, you got to shadow someone, maybe your families knew someone who you could talk to about a career. Those types of resources exist in community, and all it can take sometimes is just introducing two people together. So a lot of what we do in addition to cooking and eating and making great projects is trying to really build relationships so our young people are not cut off from a lot of the networks of support that ensure that they can have access to things that make their lives secure and fulfilling. I wanted to share with you a rewrite of our mission statement that our students recently did. So you heard a bit of our previous mission statement in the introduction, like to spark confidence, create connections, and open doors. but our students said, DFA is a healthy food-based nonprofit that influences youth to explore and have creative interests in a collaborative space focused around character building and bonding. We create cooking and business goals that are fun and help youth gain exposure and control in many aspects of their lives. And it was interesting for me to hear it because it's so different than sort of this idea of like just generating business, solving all the problems, and really it's generating enthusiasm and buy-in from people who participate in businesses, who buy from them, who start them. And so we frame ourselves kind of as a entrepreneurship program in the sense of the French root word for entrepreneurship, which means to undertake. And we ask our students to undertake the challenge of addressing things they want to see change and building an actual tangible solution that other people in the world can respond to. We have a few pretty amazing presences at markets, which I just want to like show you guys a couple of the key photos. So you'll find us at farmers markets all over the city. You will also find this product, Mitten Bites, in Whole Foods, and you'll find our popsicles as well. But I would, before I wrap up, I would just encourage folks to maybe think about the question around when we have all the pieces in place, when we have good food around, how are we encouraging people to actually take up ingredients, take up cooking utensils, and participate in it? We try in our programming to model what may be in the home kitchens of many students using hot plates. We don't use ovens. We do a lot of raw recipes, things like that, because even when you have great food at hand and you have great farms, if you don't know how to prepare it, if you don't have access, for those of you living in dorms who may only have a microwave, you may know what it's like to try to make a meal for yourself. So what does it look like when we talk about the food system as something that we're actively participating in and making together, including the youngest generation? Thank you.
How do we turn this off?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a great question. My only question.
I don't know.
I don't have a PowerPoint, so you'll just have to listen to me. I'm really sad I don't have a PowerPoint because I've been looking at these, hanging out, and it's like, I so wanted to be like, this is exactly, but now I learned to always bring a PowerPoint. And there's 3 of them, too, so anyone who's had a class in this, like, why the 3? All right, that's fine. So I'm Mark Von Topel. I want to thank you all first for joining us this evening. I want to thank Jen and Courtney for their wonderful presentations, as well as the entire Lampert Institute, which funded the 3 of us to be here today, as well as Jason and Aaron, who've done all of the logistics and made sure that we were well fed and happy and well taken care of. And so I thank you all for that. So one of the reasons I don't have a PowerPoint is I just left the District of Columbia as of 3 weeks ago. And so now I'm working for an all-local grocery store, which is a whole nother story, which, time permitting, we can go into. But really, I'd like to focus on the majority of my career prior to that, which focused around issues of social justice, environmental justice, food policy. And so that's really where I'll start, is what is food policy? So I got my master's degree in food policy. First off, I had to hobble it together at NYU from 2 different schools because at that point they only had food studies and they had policy. Well, I wanted food policy, so I put the 2 together. But then I found myself going out and talking to people and saying, oh, well, I got my master's in food policy. And people are like, what the heck is food policy? Like, what? I mean, like, I go to the grocery store. There's food in the grocery store, so I don't understand what the policy is. Well, the way I equate it is if you think back, let's go back to the early 60s, before Rachel Carson and Silent Spring, before the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, and if you were going to tell someone, hey, I'm going to go into environmental policy, they'd be like, what for? What is that? Because there were no environmental studies departments. There were no environmental policy places that you could go and work. There was no environmental law degree that you could get. But now you go into any college campus, all of those are evident. They're self-evident at this point. Well, food policy is going through its own maturation in a very similar way. But it's incredible how much policy is impacting food. For those of you who are familiar with companies like Monsanto, I can tell you that it's not lost on them how they can work policy to get their own ends. And so it's important for those of us on the other side to really engage ourselves in understanding what the policies are, how the Farm Bill works, there are so many, all the way down to minutia, where, as someone who worked for the City of New York in the District of Columbia, I can tell you there are some really crazy minutia that is impacting the way people have access to food. And so that's my plug for food policy. For anyone who has any kind of that sounds like something I would want to do it. NYU now has an established food policy master's degree. There are other schools out there that are now going into it. I thank people like Chris for developing courses here at Colgate, which at my time at Colgate were non-existent. So that's my plug for engaging yourselves, because obviously, for those of you who weren't forced to be here, for those of you who were forced to be here, thank you for showing up. For those of you who were not forced to be here, you might have a little tickle about food policy. So I encourage you to go after that. Well, what are we talking about when we talk about food policy? When it comes down to it, we're talking about food security. As Courtney has laid out, what is food security? Well, food security can happen on both sides. It can happen on the hunger side, and it can happen on the obesity side. 7 of the top 10 killers in the United States are either directly or indirectly related to what we eat. And so there's a lot of real food security issues that we're facing. Unfortunately, the people who most often suffer from food insecurity are people who are poor, people who are impoverished. Unfortunately, I don't know for those of you who recently heard, but Steve Wynn, the famous Las Vegas developer, was quoted as saying, people don't like to be around poor people. Which is funny, because that was just about 48 hours ago that he said that. In presentations, I've said that frequently, is that people don't like to be around poor people. They don't like to talk about poor people. It's a non-issue. And if you look at someone like Joel Berg at the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, I'll say it again for those of you who want to take notes and look up really cool organizations and people. That's the New York City Coalition Against Hunger. Joel Berg has a great book, lots of great things that he said. So the New York City Coalition Against Hunger was created to do what it says, to fight hunger, but in its base, he's fighting poverty. And he'll tell you, you can read everything that he's written and what he's spoken about, is that he's echoing just the same thing that I just said, is that if he founded a poverty organization, he wouldn't be able to engage people. So he actually created a hunger organization to fight poverty. And when you fight poverty, that's when you start to fight food insecurity. And those two just go hand in hand. There's no getting around that. And so, also another thing too I want to have shared at the beginning too is I'm very honored that I'm sharing the same floor as Janet Poppendick, who was an earlier speaker at the Lampert Institute, another brilliant individual who's really working on these food security issues. And so I challenge you to read these books, to go out and intern in these organizations, because that's really where you can start to understand what your opportunity is to create change within the food security movement. And so, it's an issue of how, knowing that we've got the problem of food security, how do we address that? And there are so many different ways. The ways I have done it is through policy. I wrote policy for the City of New York, where I realized that in little stupid details, I could change them so that it would make someone who, let's say that they made $200 more in a quarter, which is how SNAP is calculated, that they made $200 more in a quarter, they are no longer eligible for SNAP. Is that not really, it's asinine. So I actually created policy that, especially in the City of New York, which is it's a really great place because it's so gigantic. If we were trying to chase down, to give you an idea, there are a potential of 100,000 cases in the City of New York for us to investigate. We have the capacity to investigate 20,000 of those. Well, before I had my hand in the policy, we were just picking them up as they went. So we were doing nothing even efficient. So I said, well, why don't we do something that's a lot more efficient? Let's go after those people who are incredibly egregious. The people who have 2 homes in the Hamptons, who have multiple cars. Let's go after those people. And let's leave these other people on the low. Let's not even look at that. Well, that's what I told my bosses. That's the policy I got passed. Well, on the back end, which I was really excited about, was that people who made that $200 more in a quarter, they were not getting a letter from the Bureau of Fraud Investigation, which then all of a sudden really causes, I mean, if you got a letter from the Bureau of Fraud Investigation, like, does that make you want to engage in that program? No, and then that deters you from getting that food security. And so here it was, in a way, in my little office, you know, with my procedure writers, that we were actually able to change things to have a positive impact on thousands, tens of thousands of people. And so what I'll leave you with is, when we change our approach to poverty, and it will address the problem of food security, it'll strengthen our families and communities, and it'll allow us to move forward as a society. And so I thank you for your time. Is this yours? Yes. I was like, I figured it was one of the 3.
And I thank you all very much. I wanted to give each of you just a couple minutes if you wanted to add any comments, or if you had any thoughts just based on what you've heard from the other talks.
Well, I wanted to echo 2 things. So one, when in an earlier conversation today, I had heard Courtney say that that what's really interesting is when we talk about lack of access and food insecurity in urban environments, and how there's also high lack of access and insecurity in rural environments. And I may have this wrong, so I'd appreciate corrections, but that in the Farm Bill, sort of like hunger activists and farm subsidies are often pitted against one another in terms of policy, which is sort of how my understanding has gone. And yet, the places where food is made is often where there's a great need, and in urban environments where there's hunger, there's a need for that food as well. And it seems like we have a lot more common interest than not. And then to the policy end, that it's oftentimes, we think of these things maybe as monolithic, or someone who's smarter than us is out there doing all of these things. And that may well be true, but I think it's also each and every person who has an interest has the ability to move the needle on it. In each report you write, in each email you send, in the way you interact with a client, these things come down to the real world in a really tangible way, and little things can have a big impact. So I don't know, those were 2 things I put together. Thank you both.
Yeah. I'll build on that a little bit. I think, we all just spent a lot of time talking about food insecurity and poverty, but that's, if our topic was urban food issues, that's really only one issue. So I think, what Detroit Food Academy is doing is such a joyful, participatory way of using food as a tool to achieve other goals. Or, I think food is really interdisciplinary, so that's why I kind of got engaged in it. I was a Pecan major, so I wanted to study everything, and I feel like food allows me to do that still. But, there are urban food issues. I live in Chicago, so thinking about, certainly issues of access, but also like, how do you, in a city full of immigrants, how do you represent indigenous foods, or, foods from refugee communities or immigrant populations in a way that is joyful? And, I think that there's lots of other issues that don't necessarily have to do with hunger or food insecurity, and certainly they're connected, but I just didn't want you guys to walk away from this conversation thinking that that's like the only issue that you could study or be passionate about if you're interested in food. There's so many other kind of ways to tackle whatever excites you about it, whether it's the production, whether it's urban agriculture, whether it's getting your hands actually in the dirt, whether it's policy. This really is kind of this burgeoning area of interest, and I think there's so many young people going into the field and maybe applying their degrees that are in other areas into kind of this new food good food movement, food space too. So I just wanted to highlight that as well.
Well, I'll dovetail off of both of you. You know, talking about different ethnicities that really sparked something in my mind in my background in policy. So I studied, so the food stamps, the allocation, the monthly allocation is based on something called the Thrifty Food Plan. And that, again, is a policy that was created by people in a vacuum. And in the Thrifty Food Plan, so if you're not familiar with SNAP, you can't buy hot, ready-to-eat food. So everything in the Thrifty Food Plan must be prepared at home. If you time out how long it takes to create the Thrifty Food Plan at home, it's 16.1 hours. The person who is most frequently on food stamps is a single mother. On average, they have 6.4 hours of time for food preparation in a week. So how does that even make sense? So now your policy is immediately out of line with the people you're trying to serve. And to go off of what Jen was saying is like, you can do this, is one of my professors in my master's program told me, I was like, oh, we had a policy, we had to write a policy. And I remember I went to his office hours, I was like, I can't write a policy. He goes, what says you can't, who says you can't write a policy? Because policies are written by people. And you could be one of those people. And I was like, whoa. And then when the city of New York, I'm not even kidding, when the city of New York, I will frame it one day, I save it. It's like, when the memo that said, we want you to come and write policy. I was like, whoa, a little scared, you know, little excited. But then I went and did it. And my policies are in the city of New York. They're in the District of Columbia. And there's nothing to say that one of you sitting here right now is not the person who gets into the USDA and says, yeah, the Thrifty Food Plan is completely screwed up. We need to rewrite that policy. There's nothing saying that you can't be that person. So, yeah.
Well, now let's open up to questions from the audience.
Okay, this is like
Oh,
from,
sorry, really loud.
Oh, sorry. Okay, this is from pretty much the very beginning of yours, but with the map the meal gap, measuring food insecurity, how exactly is that measured? Like on an individual level, like how do you determine if a person is technically considered food insecure, and like what is the ambiguity with that?
That's a really great question. I can speak to it broadly, and then I can send you all kinds of follow-up information. We have a team of researchers who do this report every year, and I'm not one of them, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but basically the definition of food insecurity actually has a 19-question survey, I believe, to ask a family. So it'll be things like, or a household, I guess. At any point in the year, are you, there's like certain coping strategies that are sort of red flags for food insecurity. So are you rationing food so it will last longer? Are you watering down food so it will last longer? You know, at any point in the month, do you kind of go without food? Do you not eat so that your children can eat? Like, there's all of these sort of indicators of food insecurity, and then there are different levels. So you could be high food insecurity, which was what we were showing, kind of the breakdown between urban, suburban, and rural. And that, I think, to be a high, to kind of count into the high food insecurity bucket, it's like you answer 11 of those 19 questions in the affirmative or something. So it's a really sort of like nitty-gritty research breakdown, and there's a name for that set of questions. I don't know if
I
you
know
know.
that. I know that's. I've been trying to. It's the. Yeah, I know.
It's like a gold stand, you know, a research set of questions that like other researchers will use too. So Feeding America sort of combines that data along with some other data, including housing, the average cost of a meal in that city, and there's this incredible researcher named Craig Gunderson who's at the University of Illinois, and he sort of puts it all together in a statistical model and is able to, you know, come up with that. So I can send you a lot more information. If you go to Map the Meal Gap too, there's like a great executive summary and some more information about the research methodologies. But it's fascinating how they're able to kind of come out with something that's also consistent year over year. So a big goal of this is to be able to use it to show trends over time, to compare data from one year to the next. And so it's definitely a major research effort. Yeah. So if any of you are interested in research, that would be an incredible type of project you could work on potentially. Yeah.
I'm just curious, let's see how I can phrase this, how any of your programs, or I'd like to know if any of your programs look at food production, I'm sure you do, but I mean food production and the way foods are produced in relationship to potential health issues, because the fact that you mentioned Monsanto brought that question to my mind.
Yeah, well, that's a very important question. And that goes directly to policy, because these corporations are heavily subsidized. And so what are the crops that are cash crops that are subsidized? It's corn, wheat, soy, rice, cotton. Not necessarily intuitive, but cottonseed oil is in a lot of things. Is that those are subsidized as cash crops. They receive federal subsidies. I'm going to say that again. Those crops receive cash from the government. The reason why I have to say it so loud is that the other things, the things you might recognize as food, apples, a green pepper, fruits and vegetables, are classified as specialty crops and do not receive any funding from the federal government. So how is that? I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of the policies around food production are putting the foods on the shelves that we see, which cause food insecurity. And the USDA shockingly is starting to consider subsidizing specialty crops. Specialty crops. I mean, really? Like, is a strawberry a specialty crop? So it is incredibly concerning. The food system, as it is set up currently, it produces the foods that cause food insecurity, and it does not subsidize the foods that create health.
Well, may I just
Yeah.
my question? That's one aspect of
Yep.
it, yes. It's what types of foods you want to produce. But the reason I'm asking this question is we moved to the country upstate New York about 6 years ago and from the city and discovered there are lots of TV programs that specifically relate to farmers and farm production. And they discuss and promote things that we're just not bombarded with when we live in the city. And one of the things is, again, chemicals to help, this
Yep.
incredible GMOs and roundups and how to
You got it.
how to best coat this stuff. And if you watch that, you think, wow, there is no organic here.
No.
So, and I'm not, specifically anti any of this, but I certainly I'm not comfortable seeing it sprayed on everything in the intense way that it is. So if your policies relate to increased food production or even federal subsidies, my question more is, do you keep an eye on how that food is produced, I guess, is more of my question.
I would say yes, absolutely. The idea of having Terminator seeds, of having it's crazy. The Flavor Saver tomato, which almost made it to market, it ended up not making it. Well, for those of you who have grown tomatoes, and for those of you who haven't, tomatoes do not like freezing. They don't like frost. So, from someone sitting in in a lab somewhere, we can all like think of like some sort of mad scientist. They're like, all right, how am I going to create this tomato? Well, what they realized was like, oh, you know what? You know what's really good at not freezing? Our flounder. Flounder live at the bottom of the sea where it's very, very cold. They have to regulate their temperature extremely well to survive. So what they did was they isolated the gene that maintains their temperature. They spliced it into the tomato. It never made it to market, unfortunately. If it did, I think we would have a whole different conversation. If it made it to market, they would actually have to put contains fish. For those of you who are truth in labeling laws, you have to contain allergen information. They would actually have to put on a tomato contains fish. So yes, we need to pay particular attention not only to how they're producing it, but who owns the rights. I mean, I think that things like our foodstuffs are not something to be trademarked, and you know, when left to run amok, that's where you end up with, you know, an organic farmer being sued by Monsanto because the pollen from from a neighboring farm drifted onto their fields, and now they're being sued for copyright infringement. So yes, when left, you know, out of sight, out of mind, we will end up. We have ended up with a very sad food system.
Let's see. Other questions? No.
Jen, I'd like to hear a little bit more about attitudes from the students about the types of food they're maybe getting at school. You talked a little bit about, I guess, programs that are sort of forcing particular types of foods onto students that may be healthier but that they don't appreciate. So what's your experience, and has there been an evolution in Detroit about thinking about that? I know you have an after-school program, so I'm not sure how much you're involved with what's being served at schools, but I'd just like to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. We get pretty involved with what happens in the cafeteria. That ends up being something a lot of students want to focus on. Who liked their school lunch in high school? A few
Pizza
people.
day?
Okay.
Pizza day?
Few people. Yeah. French fry day, 3 days a week. Yeah. Cool. So they're not always terrible. Sometimes they're great. So some of the programs where we were putting local food on the line were special initiatives that food service directors really took a leap in order to do. It's something that is like of questionable gray area legality. It's not really in the state of Michigan, but people sort of believe it is. They're like, can you really just take something out of the field and wash it and cook it and feed it to people? Like, it doesn't have to be bleached and sterilized and come in a plastic bag, which is very different than the majority of the food in the Detroit Public School District and in many of the schools in the city, which are not public but are chartered, which is steam and heat kitchens, essentially. So having all scratch cooking being taken out of schools. So our students oftentimes want to identify what's being served as something they want to change. And they'll do that in all kinds of ways. We've had students do cafeteria takeovers where they make the food 1 day a week. And we bring in plug-and-play cooking equipment, which is how we teach our program at different schools. We just bring in electric skillets and hot plates and anything else, and our students have cooked meals for 500 kids on hot plates and skillets and goofy things like that. It may not be, an everyday, fully sustainable thing, but I think, it maybe speaks to your question a little bit when you're peeling back the walls between where does this food come from and what's the process that it goes through to get to me. You spark in each individual a lot better questions around what am I eating and why and how do I get it and what am I supporting. And that's what we've seen our students doing quite a bit of. There's definitely, we do a lot of exposure around what's seasonal. There's a big food sovereignty movement in the city of Detroit, so trying to use our land to grow over half of the fruits and vegetables consumed in the city for Detroiters. And students engage with that and they start to think, oh, like that's what lettuce is supposed to look like, or that's what a tomato is supposed to taste like. And even though that may not be available in every grocery store or every school yet, it sort of plants the seed to say, why isn't this here? And that question then, has a million answers. It has policy, it has chefs, it has business owners, it has folks who decide to cook at home. Yeah, but it's definitely, there's a big separation between what's nourishing and what is subsidized. Pizza sauce is a vegetable serving, according to the USDA nutrition standards, from what I understand. So we have a ways to go, but I think questioning it and seeing that it's not just something that comes out of a bag or a refrigerator, we can actually see behind it. I think it's a really powerful.
So just a quick follow-up. So when the students were cooking for 500 people, they picked what they were going to prepare? What did they pick?
That is a great question. They picked vegetable curry. And they had done a survey. So they did, in the 2 weeks before in the cafeteria, they asked students what they would want to pick, and they gave them 3 different options. And vegetable curry won, which was pretty good. And they had a side of sweet potatoes and a salad that they made. And they made the dressing, and people really liked it. And it might have been novelty, but it really, being in the space, students were like, oh, this tastes good. And I mean, for those of you who've spent any time in cafeterias, you may see that, hot dogs come with the bun and the hot dog in a bag, and you pop the steam bag open and you eat it, or you have vegetable or fruits soaked in syrup and you undo the lid of the cup, and that's not living food. And so I think there was a lot of enthusiasm. They made menus and had chef coats on. It was cool.
I'd love to add on to that too, because a lot of what you're talking about, these themes of choice and participation and dignity, that is also translating to kind of our network of food pantries and soup kitchens, and similarly to how kids in the past may not have had a choice about what was being served to them. I think a lot of poor people or people who needed to access the charitable food system were also kind of take what you can get, right? And so I think a lot of our work is around making sure that people have that choice and that dignity when they are coming together for a meal. There's something really powerful about feeding someone and nourishing someone and the communal aspect of that. And I think that can get lost when you are thinking about these people as the other, or just food as calories, right? And so I think there's a lot of misconceptions, especially around food stamps and SNAP benefits, about what people are buying, and should we have rules about what you can buy when you have food stamps. And for me, I think it all comes back to dignity and choice. And, if I was someone who only had $16 a month to spend on my family, I'd probably buy the thing with the most calories too. So how can we provide more options for people, more healthy produce, more and more soup kitchens are turning into more of restaurants where there's menus and you get served tableside, and I think that's a really powerful thing for people, and it's definitely an encouraging trend, I think, in this sort of charitable food space. That's, I think, similar kind of philosophies coming through schools or other places where food is kind of provided publicly, right?
All right.
I really want to thank you for your presentations. I wonder for students here if they're interested in getting into some kind of career in whether it's food policy or something about food and community, whatever, what would you recommend to them in terms of classes to take, networking to do, research to engage in? What, 1 or 2 key tips would you give them for pursuing that type of a career path?
I'd say intern. There are so many wonderful organizations out there that are doing this work, and a great place, because the food movement is so broad. I mean, just in our 3 presentations, there's some sense of the breadth, but it's much wider than that. So, when you think about it, I mean, yeah, I'll tell you, when I was sitting in your seat, I don't know if I would have gotten all hot over policy, but now I am. But, it's like, and so, figuring out, I think, through an internship, you're able to get your feet wet. You're able to do that networking, and meet people who can potentially connect you to other things. But first and foremost, it will expose you to the type of work that organization does. And so, yeah, maybe you're really centered on farm worker justice, which sadly is often overlooked in the food movement. maybe you go and work with United Farm Workers doing an internship, and that really, that works out for you. Well, you know what? Maybe you go and work with UFW, and you're like, meh, that's not for me. But then you go and work for, Share Our Strength, which is doing, or Feeding America, which is doing national policy work, and maybe that really connects with you. So internships, for where you're at right now, I would say internships are a great opportunity to explore the opportunities and understand your interests more.
I would agree. I would just second that. I think getting out and trying things, moving out of kind of the theoretical and actually going and participating in some of this work is an amazing way to see what you think about it. And I'm going to give you the really cliche quote that I'm sure you all heard before, but it's, not asking what you think the world needs, it's asking what sets you on fire, because what the world needs is people who are set on fire. And I know it can be tempting sometimes in a liberal arts institute to feel like there's, something is more important, it's more pressing, it's the priority. I should bend my interest towards it because it's needed, right? But I think really saying, I like policy, but do I really like it in practice, and getting out there and trying it? Or, I think I might like farming. We are in Farm Central. There are many people who I'm sure would love to have you working with them. And I think trying it is a beautiful way to really see what's out there and what you enjoy and where you can really contribute. So get out there and do it. And I should just make a plug for Detroit Food Academy, but I know that if anyone ever wanted to come to Detroit and you were willing to get yourself there for the summer, we always welcome folks who want to volunteer their time. And I think many other organizations do too. And it just oftentimes means asking. They may not have it on their website, apply to intern, but if you're interested, reach out, because people are usually very responsive.
We have time for one last quick question.
I was wondering something that's maybe a little bit outside the boundaries here. When I hear you talk, I agree with the things that you're saying. The thing that always is a problematic for me is dealing with things on the personal level.
Mm.
So I wondered what you do to make your food choices during the day or week or however you make them, and what you think about in terms of your own needs and your own progress through the world and your own responsibility to whatever, important values are out there that are folded into each choice of meal.
It's a beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah, and I can maybe tie it back to the last one actually too. When I left Colgate, I knew I was really passionate about these issues, but I didn't know what I wanted to do next, and so I actually worked for a farm in the area for a year after school, and I knew I didn't necessarily want to own my own farm, but I felt really like I wanted that deeper connection to the issues, and that, maybe I would go into policy one day, and I wanted to know kind of, if I got up in front of a room of people and said, like, everyone should be organic, like, I wanted to know how hard that is, like, how hard it is to be an organic farmer. There's a reason people spray their fields. Do I think it's the best thing for the fields? No. Do I think it's sometimes the best thing for the farmer? Maybe sometimes, So I really wanted to kind of get that on the ground experience, and I think whatever piece of this is important to you, whether it is production or it is being in a kitchen or it is providing direct service to clients, it's great to kind of have national experience and kind of be up here where all the big decisions are made, but I also think it's really important to kind of touch them and feel them. And I think for me, now that I am kind of working nationally, I don't always get that connection. So I try to volunteer as much as I can. Feeding America actually is a really wonderful volunteer policy where we're allowed to take one day a month to go out and work in a pantry or a soup kitchen. So that's really important for me and kind of recenters me. And then, I'm really passionate, obviously, about issues of production, in part from my time on a farm. So, I belong to a CSA in Chicago. I slip up. Like, there are foods that I love that are not good, clean, and fair. And I'm sure if I dug into how, my Doritos were made, that I would be horrified. So I think it's not about being perfect, but about being thoughtful and deliberate. And I also think something that gets lost in this conversation a lot is the joy and pleasure that comes with food. There's nothing more connective than sitting down and talking to someone about what, tell me what your favorite thing your mother made for you was, or who has the best French fries, like you were saying, or, these are things people feel really passionately about. And so I think when you're working on some of these really tough issues that are connected to food, it can be easy to kind of forget the joy and the pleasure too. So that's something I kind of connect with in my outside of work and through volunteering and just spending time in my own kitchen too, is kind of the nourishing power of food and how it can connect you to place and community where you are. Yeah, thank you.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I agree.
Well, let's thank our speakers.
Thank you.